Greetings sailors and welcome to Patreon Supporter Spotlight number 74. This is going to be a double Warships Replay edition, and it's also going to be a double US Battleship edition. We're going to start off with the Wyoming, driven here by you, who there's no way to say that word sensibly the way they've spelled it, so, you know, I just roll with it. This is quite an old replay at this point. I think both of these replays are older, but this one is actually maybe the more recent of the two. I think this is 0.79, which is still going back into last year. And it's one I've been sat on for a little while. Most of you's replays I've shown have actually been from World of Tanks. But as he said in the replay where he sent this particular game, he has also been playing Warships off and on since either closed beta or open beta. I can't remember which exactly, but he just doesn't play it very often. It's a thing he dips into occasionally, and so he's not had that many games from it to send me, but this has been one of them. And I actually don't think I've shown too many Wyoming games in the past. It's maybe not the most popular ship at its tier, but it's not bad for a tier 4 battleship. Like most of the standards with 14-inch guns, it has an awful lot of them, which sort of makes up for the not great accuracy, but none of the battleships at tier 4 have particularly amazing accuracy. This is, being an older replay, one with older carriers, and there's two of them, and I think this might even have been the era when you could still make manual drops with tier 4s, or is it not that far back? I can't actually remember when they made that change, but he's got that to contend with anyway, although as you'll see his AA is not going to cope too badly. He is going to get some plane kills, which will obviously help him out a bit. What also helps out is when you have enemy battleships giving nice broadsides. That's obviously going to be quite nice for whoever dropped those torpedoes as well. I think it must have been the G101 who, there we go, gets the kill on the Miyogi, who, I don't know, you know, this is an older replay. Maybe by this point they've learned not to sail in straight lines in their battleship quite so much. Maybe? Who knows? You do still see these players even at tier 10 who haven't quite mastered the art of WAS attacks yet. So far they really only do have this north cap, and in fact all the ships to the south here on this is Strait, I believe. I think this map's called Strait anyway. I can never quite remember all the map names or keep them all straight in my head indeed, but this is, you know, a quite familiar low tier map to most people, and the way it spawns you is usually not even quite half the team north and half the team south. It pits unequal numbers of ships against each other. But the team to the south haven't even really put up a fight. They are just straight up running up that eastern passage. So that gives the team at the moment more cap circles, and they are actively trying to contest the sea cap as well. But they have fewer ships left up here at this point, so it's obviously not going to work out. However, stuff like that doesn't help. That Bellerophon absolutely just gave away their ship for not really a great deal of return. You know, that was definitely far in the enemy team's favour. A low health battleship taking out a very high health battleship. And the Bellerophon is not terrible. I mean, it's a tier 3 battleship, but it's still a battleship's worth of points they just lost. And so that's comfortably put the enemy team out ahead, even though they just lost a battleship as well. So overall, this isn't looking great. And oh, by the way, have you noticed that there's also a destroyer to his north somewhere? Now, he had, and because he's not been sailing in extremely straight lines for this destroyer, he was able to fairly neatly avoid those deep water torps, but it's still something he's got to be wary of. It only requires too long a moment of inattention to take some torps, because at this tier the torp reloads are not particularly long. Oh, one thing I did want to note, by the way, recording this has been a bit of a pain, in fact. With my recent tanks replays, this is going to be a bit of a how the sausages are made moment. I've been doing something a bit different with how I've been recording them. I have been using the capability that's now in Bandicam to use the VCE encoding that I can do with my AMD graphics card, which is basically the equivalent of the NVIDIA NVENC capabilities, which is, you know, a lot of people use Shadow Play, and that's what uses NVENC, but you can also use NVENC through third-party recording programs. Well, you can now do that with AMD cards as well, or some, you know, newer ones anyway. If you have a very old AMD card, it might not actually be compatible. But I've been doing that with my Tanks replays, and I've been reasonably happy with, I think, what seems to me like improved quality once they get through YouTube's processing, you know, which is all out of my hands pretty much. But I've noticed that, at least to my eyes, it seems like it's a bit better in terms of when there's a lot of movement going on screen. It doesn't break up quite as much. And so I thought I'd give that a go with Warships as well, where I've been using OBS and X264. And it seemed to work fine. It recorded absolutely perfectly. The one downside with Warships replays, which has always been the case, is that you have to hit the stop recording button if you're doing a client record at exactly the right moment, or else it just chews the whole thing up in a way that you can't actually then make use of. Whereas OBS, it doesn't really care if the client disappears. It's a lot more tolerant of that sort of thing. But what I did discover was, with using the VCE encoding, it absolutely mangled the audio. For some reason, it was losing a lot of data from the audio stream, so I had to go through and chop up all the audio and shift it by like half a second here and a tenth of a second there. And it wasn't like it was desynced by a consistent amount. It wasn't like it was like a second behind and I just had to shift the entire audio track forward by a second. No, it consistently slipped throughout the entire thing. And it would have taken me just as long to go and re-record the things in OBS, so I decided to just do it in Vegas instead and shift it, you know, a half a second here and a tenth of a second there. So this might, like, in terms of visual quality, might look quite decent, but I'm not going through that again, so I'm going to go back to OBS, I think, which is just a lot more reliable. So anyway, yeah, that was all nothing to do with the game. It's just, man, this video was slightly more annoying than usual to take, to record. And if you notice some of the sounds being a little out of sync with what happens on screen, that is why. It's a very long-winded explanation as to why that is the case. So they've lost one carrier, they've lost most of their ships, they are badly down on points, they have a cap at least, there's this destroyer still running around behind them. All in all, it's not looking great, is it? I mean, it really could be going a lot better at this point. It's basically him, South Carolina, and Svetlana, because they've just lost their last carrier. So that's good. He's also got to be slightly wary about torps still. I mean, the Pharaoh Rang hasn't gone away, and the Duguay Trois also has torps, but he absolutely chews through most of that cruiser's hit points with one salvo, and if he gets lucky, he might finish him off with his next one. This many guns at close range, even if it is that rather low-tier battleship shotgun effect, it can still be fairly devastating. So there we go, shots out, and there's the kill. Didn't even get a citadel or anything, but he didn't need it, just a couple of pens was all it took, and now he is fully free to concentrate on this Pharaoh Ruang, although there are also some battleships now pushing up from the south as well. Svetlana, meanwhile, I mean, they are dealing with the attentions of the carrier, but that's actually almost a good thing. I mean, I think they're trying to go after the carriers, and there is in fact a Langley up in that corner, so they're going to be bearing the brunt of the carrier's attention, but that leaves the South Carolina free to cap B, potentially, depending on what the enemy battleships do. If they decide to focus on you, then that leaves them free to regain the cap, and they really badly need the points. They also badly need some kills, but if they can at least stop the bleeding, then that'll be something. This Pharaoh Ruang, by the way, has completely thrown caution to the wind. They have been spotted by his spotter planes, and he's actually got the catapult captain's skill there, which gives him 2 spotter planes, which is helping him out a bit. But yeah, although he does stealth up again, you knows exactly where he is, and then inexplicably he opens fire. Now this might just be fatal overconfidence due to the fact that there are battleships pushing up from the south, but they're not that close yet. They are at best at kind of medium ranges, and indeed I think at least one of them is trying to engage the South Carolina. So why the Pharaoh Ruang opened fire there is a bit of a mystery. That was absolutely the wrong move, and it threw away their biggest advantage, which was being able to stealth up, reposition and drop torps from potentially an unexpected angle. Although, given that you knows that they are around, or knew that they were around, it's kind of a harder thing to do at that point. You have to be a lot more persistent. You have to start trying to guess a lot better as to how somebody's going to be manoeuvring. So with Svetlana having made it to one Langley, they've actually spotted the other enemy Langley, and that gives you some shots at just about the edge of his range without the aid of the spotter. Or are the spotters up at the moment? It's actually kind of hard to tell. I can see them flying around, but I don't know, the countdown timer, surely that's them coming back to... I don't even know. It's hard to tell. But I don't think that's his spotter-aided range. I think that's his default range at this point. I honestly can't remember offhand what the range of the Wyoming is. It's not a ship I've exactly gone back and played much. I have some things that I've kept at tier 4, but the Wyoming wasn't really one of them. Although having said that, I have the Arkansas Beta, which is basically this ship, but without AA, and the ability to have all of the modules that you can have on a tier 10 battleship, essentially. I think it's like tier 9 and 10 for the full range, or is it just tier 10? I can't actually remember. I'm doing well at remembering stuff about this game I've played a lot, aren't I? So against the odds, Svetlana has survived, taken out one of the Langleys, and then Yu is able to get the second Langley for his 4th kill, and actually does get some citadels for the kill there, conforming with the well-known rule that if you're going to kill them from low health, then it's got to be with a citadel. Didn't quite work out with the Duc Étoile, but it works all the time, some of the time. Now, as for the South Carolina, instead of hanging around to explicitly engage these enemy battleships, they're doing actually the smart thing. I mean, it's sort of screwing you a little bit in that it's leaving him alone up here. And the enemy South Carolina is now engaging, and the enemy Wyoming is also coming up behind them, although I think they've been sailing slower somehow. They've not been actually going full speed. But that just left one ship engaging the friendly South Carolina, and they've actually been able to take them out. And they're just now going to cap C. And because of the kills, because of this South Carolina capping, somehow this has been equalised. Now I've sped up about 4-ish minutes of gameplay here, because this latter stage of the battle is basically just this. You trading fire with this South Carolina, who alternates a bit between HE and AP shells. Unless you gives them a flat broadside at this kind of range, they are unlikely to get a lot of traction. But they're still chipping away some of his health. They're still trying. And because he's having to maneuver and angle a bit, because there's the Wyoming as well, he's unable to give them anything like a full broadside. So he equally is forced to just chip away a bit here and a bit there. Fortunately for him, the enemy Wyoming isn't a great player. I mean, they must have been sailing at half speed up that passage to have been overtaken by a South Carolina. But it works out nicely for you, because the ship that is by far the closer and therefore more likely to land hits on him is also the one that is inherently less dangerous to him. But his own gunnery, yeah, it's not maybe You know, he's topped 100k. This is a good game in terms of damage for being a tier 4 battleship. But his own gunnery is maybe letting him down a bit. So with about a minute left on the clock, he's going to have to work hard if he wants a Kraken out of this. But with all of the caps and with having gotten it down to being an equal footing in terms of actual numbers of ships, they've pulled really far ahead in points. And so it's not even a minute left, it's the dying seconds of the game. So, no Kraken, sadly, but he did get Dev Strike, Confederate, High Caliber, and Dreadnought. Used all of his heals, 102,000 damage done, and overall, I would say he really did help quite conclusively win that game, but we can't discount that South Carolina doing the smart thing and grabbing those caps. The enemy couple of remaining battleships were, you know, they were picking on him because he was the lower health ship, and okay, but they were then completely ignoring their own caps, so that actively worked against them, despite them going into that situation with a much better hand in terms of ships and points. And so overall, although it looked pretty dicey, it ended up being a very nice win. So we're jumping from a World War I era battleship all the way firmly into World War II, with the Missouri being driven here by tugboat. Although, having said that, both of the Wyomings did actually serve in some capacity during World War II as well. I'm trying to remember which way round it was. One of them was basically semi-decommissioned or demilitarized, or however you want to say it, and used as a training vessel. But one of the other ones, of the two of them, that was technically grammatically correct, I suppose, was actually used in active service. I think mostly as a convoy escort, but in fact, let me just look this up. Right, Wyoming was the training ship, and Arkansas was used as initially a convoy escort, and then from 1944 it was also used as a bombardment vessel to aid with Operation Overlord, and then was transferred to the Pacific, where it provided fire support to Marines fighting on Iwo Jima and Okinawa. So despite, you know, some of these ships being a bit long in the tooth by World War II, they were still able to find some use of them, even if they weren't necessarily great for fighting other more modern battleships. If you've still got battleship caliber guns available, that's going to be more than good enough for pelting shore targets. But anyway, that has nothing to do with this game at all, and I'm apparently just having one of my rambly days, so let's actually talk about this match. So yes, this is Tugboat in the Missouri, one of the Iowa sisters, and he's top tier again, which is quite nice. This is a map where he might actually be able to usefully use the radar. There are a couple of enemy destroyers available, and there's also going to be, I mean, this is again an older replay, there's going to be a couple of oddities in terms of I think there's a Pensacola at tier 7, I think there's a New Orleans at tier 8, so if you're wondering about US cruisers being on the wrong tier, that's why. And again, I had the exact same audio issues with this one and had to manually resync it, so there might be some bits where the gunfire is slightly out of sync with the actual what's happening on screen. So initially I would say this isn't the best thing that Tugboat could have done as an initial push on the A-cap. Coming around the outside of the A-cap like this, especially when he's in a radar ship, I mean, if it was just him it might not be so bad, but he's got a whole herd of ships following him, and so the ships trying to take the middle are horribly outmatched. Most of the rest of the team has come over to this side, and of those ships, most of them are here, which isn't really helping them take the cap at all. And indeed, as you can see, this first 5 minutes, I cut out like a whole minute there. He's not really done a lot, and he's now finally belatedly pushing towards the cap, I think realising that going all the way around the outside is going to take far too long and it's going to accomplish far too little. Sadly, some of his teammates aren't going to come to that same revelation. And it's him finally pushing in that's going to get them this cap, despite them having had a destroyer here. the Mayhan, for some reason, like they've lost one of their destroyers already. The two ships that were in B got slaughtered, unsurprisingly, and then for some reason the Mayhans decided to go over to the south side of the B cap as well, despite there being an empty free cap for him to get in there and get for the team. Instead, it is Tugboat who has finally had to make the move into the cap, and we now have some ships belatedly following in behind him. This enemy Iowa, meanwhile, they are in a pretty bad position. They wandered all the way over here without any form of team support whatsoever. So that's nice, easy prey for his team, but the danger is that everybody does an impression of the seagulls from Finding Nemo and goes, mine, 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 and they all rush off after him instead of actually playing the objectives, which can be a problem sometimes. You'll get ships that are chasing down that one target because they want the damage and they want the kill, even if it is strategically, tactically, completely the wrong thing to do. But keep that thought in mind, because it's not only his own teammates that are going to be guilty of that. We're going to see some of that from the enemy team as well. And it may or may not be a decisive factor in this game, but just to give a tiny mild spoiler. So he pops his radar, I think, just because that smoke is there, but we know that the destroyer that was there, I think it was a Shenyang, has died at this point. It's possible he just hadn't noticed he was lighting up the smoke just to be on the safe side, or it might have been expressly to try and pick up that Chapayev. Unfortunately, his shots at the Chapayev weren't particularly effective despite it being broadside. RNG was not especially kind to him, so it wasn't the most useful use of radar in terms of the actual damage output, but sometimes you don't know until you've fired the pinged the radar and fired the shots whether it's actually going to have been useful or not. Sadly, you can't have magic hindsight in this game. I think he's a bit tempted also just to keep following through, go for the Chapayev, although he would have to be careful about torpedoes potentially if he got too close. But the Chapayev's angling isn't really optimal for that, so that wouldn't be maybe that much of an issue. But as it is, he lets the Miyoko just go for it and pulls around to the south instead. They have, in the meanwhile, lost their Mayhan. They've lost their other destroyer already. I'm not entirely sure what the Mayhan was trying to accomplish, but yeah, neither of the team's destroyers acquitted themselves particularly well. I can't think what their other destroyer was at this point, but it's possible they were just trying to run through the B cap to escape, and it just wasn't possible with how many ships there turned out to be there. But the Mayhan maybe doesn't even really have an excuse. I'm not entirely sure what they were thinking. So at this point, we're just going to get into some classic bow tanking. He doesn't have to worry that much about torpedoes. He's got some broadside targets to shoot at. And this is actually more or less, I would say, the right thing to do at this stage from this position. There is an argument to be made that maybe he should have pushed through the middle with that Miyoko. That might, not even just to go for the Chapayev, but just to try and occupy that centre ground and get the middle cap, because as it is, the Miyoko is now alone in B and has just died. But potentially going through the middle at this point actually might have just gotten him killed as well. It's a bit of a tough call, to be honest. I'm not going to say he definitely should have, it's just he maybe could have, and it might have turned out better if he'd been there in a battleship. Maybe. So that Bismarck is down, but we also have, well, basically the rest of the enemy battleships to contend with, barring the North Carolina, which is still over in sea somewhere. The Bauern de Grosser isn't that much of a threat just because A, German dispersion, and B, the de Grosser's only got 4 barrels pointing forwards, and just because they're not particularly accurate barrels, yeah. It's not a terrible ship overall, but it's not great in terms of its firepower. It's one of those battleships where you want to get the best possible rate of fire that you possibly can, just to make up for the inherent shortcomings of your main battery. And perhaps deciding that they are fed up with only having their front battery available, they turn to give him a nice broadside. And I mean, it's not the wisest move. It's going to give them more guns available. And yes, they're not going to get citadeled. Well, it's not likely they'll get citadeled at this range. But he can still have some fair old chunks of damage taken off him. So, yeah, that's not particularly smart angling there, DeGrosser. You are going to pay the price for that. Although, talking of paying the price, it's not like Tugboat isn't also taking a bit of a battering here himself. He's got the DeGrosser, the Iowa, and also the Edinburgh firing at him. Although the DeGrosser is soon to be not a problem. Talking of DeGrossers, their own is now pushing south. And while they're reasonably healthy, I'm not convinced that it's necessarily the best thing to have done at this point, because it's them and an Indianapolis versus the Iowa, who is very healthy and just firing from long range. The Kiev, who seems to know what they're doing. They're just running around firing at things from their longest range. And the Edinburgh, of course, is doing Edinburgh things, hiding behind an island, using smoke when they have it. So the DeGrosser pushing out with, you know, a decent amount of health versus the Iowa with also a decent amount of health. It's initially maybe not the worst engagement in the world, but as they keep pushing, it's very much going to start going against them in terms of their ability to do damage versus how much damage they're actually taking in. Now, like the previous game, we are over halfway and badly down on points, but not nearly as badly as the previous game. That was quite a comeback, but it's still not looking great overall, especially as the other Missouri on Tugboat's team is not being the most aggressive player. I mean, the DeGrosser is being, as I've said, possibly a bit too aggressive, but we have the other Missouri that's doing the complete opposite and being just a touch too passive. In fact, more than just a touch too passive, especially considering the battering that Tugboat has taken, although he can still heal back a fair bit at this stage. It would be good, you know, this is the stage where when you're in a high health battleship, it would be good to step up and take a bit of the strain, use some of the hit points, and generally, you know, throw your weight around a bit. But this isn't one of those players. This is one of those, I don't want to get my paintwork scratched players. At least, just judging from how they've been playing, that's how it seems like to me. So regardless of the fact that he's not perhaps in the best shape, although he could be, there we go, using heal right now. You know, ideally the Missouri would be making the other Missouri would be making the push here, and Tugboat could then back them up. But as it is, he's the one that's having to take the lead because this other Missouri is just being far too passive. So goodbye, Tier 7 Pensacola. This might actually be long enough ago that it was the old Pensacola with the battleship equivalent surface detection range. Yeah, that thing wasn't fun to play. So it wasn't that much of a threat, but it's nice to get another kill regardless. And that really just leaves as the immediate problem that North Carolina, who's pulling nicely broadside, in fact, and is going to pay the price. Yeah, that was a pretty big chunk of health. That was close to half their hit points. Now, it did knock out one of his turrets, but because he knows the North Carolina isn't going to beat the repair time, he doesn't just immediately jab the damage control party key and instead just lets it repair naturally.
The enemy is about to win.
And because he's holding fire, and I mean, he could try and take a pop at the Iowa, but because he's holding fire, he's able to cap in peace and be unspotted. And he knows at this point, he must know that, yeah, they need the caps. They really need the points. And if they can knock out this North Carolina and take the sea cap as well, whilst there are a lot of enemy ships distracted with that one Friedrich de Grosser who's still pushed south. I did say this would be, you know, a thing the enemy team would do as well, that instead of playing the objectives, defending the objectives, they've gone for the lone ship that looks like an easy kill. And that is now starting to cost them badly. Now he's had one lucky long-range strike on the Iowa already. We'll see if he can replicate it. Although, obviously, his attention is going to... has switched back to the North Carolina as the much closer target. Now, this is the point, by the way. I was wondering, because we hadn't really had a look at that other Missouri yet. I was thinking, are they really low health? Is that why they're being so cautious? And letting the more beat-up ship take all of the hits and being so passive? This is the kind of behaviour that is actively detrimental to winning games. But no, as it turned out, as you can see, they are in fact very high health. So, yeah, no, this was just not a particularly great player. But the fact that they are still alive, and they have done some damage, they place up high enough on the team list that it's not like they were doing nothing. It's just they could have been doing a heck of a lot more and positioning themselves a heck of a lot better. But, yeah, with another lovely broadside shot on the North Carolina, that's managed to finish them off, and now he's trying to cap, although the Edinburgh is well close enough that he's absolutely going to get spotted. Keep being spotted, in fact, so he's just going to get reset continually. However, it is providing some distraction, as it were. You know, they don't want to get too close because he's here firing at them. Or, well, this Edinburgh in particular, the Kiev maybe could have gotten close enough to spot their own Edinburgh that's capping. But it's providing cover for the Edinburgh to cap, essentially. And, oh, hello, other Missouri, you've belatedly come to join us. Well, that's very nice of you. Well done. The Kiev is probably the main worry at the moment because he's reasonably stationary. And honestly, with the Torps having come in, well, I mean, they were Edinburgh Torps. And actually, he's unspotted right at this moment, so if the Kiev is close by, they're not close enough to spot. But I would be giving serious consideration to using one of my radars at this point. And he actually kind of, if I'm remembering correctly, he doesn't. And there we go, there's some Kiev shells coming over, so we know the Kiev is probably within radar range. I would have pinged my radar just to get a bead on where the Kiev actually is. And I'm not sure why Tugboat didn't. It might just be that there was enough stuff in front of him that he decided, or not even decided, that he just didn't think about it. I haven't mentioned, by the way, but this is a rare instance. I mean, I don't see this very often with replays, and I very rarely use this skill myself, but the incoming fire alert captain skill. I don't know if it looks quite the same these days, but that's why the thing keeps flicking like that, which is actually slightly distracting. You know, if it still operates like that, then I don't think I'd use it just on that basis alone. So the Iowa turning a bit broadside, and I mean, he's looking, Tugboat's looking to the side. He's clearly thinking about the Kiev, so why not use a radar? I don't get it. I don't know. I really can't explain that one, but it's going to cost him some hit points. Now that looks like a widespread. Not sure why it's a widespread. The Kiev didn't seem to want to quite get close enough to really make this a critical attack. I mean, he lost some health. He doesn't have any heals left, and it did knock out a turret temporarily, which is immediately repaired in this instance. But as it is, now the Kiev has gone for B. And given that there's less than a minute left, actually trying to get a kill would have been a lot more useful. And having gone for the cap instead, I mean, this one, I mean, the previous game, the enemy team was a lot further ahead on points, but on this game, we're ending a lot closer on points. Having been sunk, you know, if Tugboat had been killed by a salvo of Kiev Torps, that could have been the clincher. It might not have been enough, given that they were still getting ticks from the cap points, but given that the other Missouri hasn't been particularly effective and the Edinburgh pulled back, yeah, who knows how that might have gone if that enemy Kiev had been a bit bolder. But maybe because it was a pair of radar ships there, that might have been the clincher in deciding not to try for it. Anyway, so that was a very good result. 2,500 base XP, as well as I've missed all the different medals there, but a bunch of medals. The other Missouri, as I said, they must have done something. They placed halfway up the team list, but just shy of 1200 base XP on a win that was that close, and being one of the surviving ships, and having that much health left at the end. Yeah, not the best battleship player in the world. But at least they didn't suicide into the enemy team, and you could argue that's what the Friedrich de Grosser did. But then equally, you could argue if they hadn't done that, they all wouldn't have gone chasing down south and abandoned the caps and left them free to be taken out. And ultimately, that's what won the game. So despite the Friedrich de Grosser doing at the time what was the wrong thing, because the enemy team then responded by also doing a wrong thing, that turned into two wrongs making a right, somehow. I don't know what moral I'm trying to construct out of this exactly, but it was an interesting game anyway. So that's it for this Patreon supporter video. I'll actually maybe pimp myself a little bit because I don't often remember to do this, but if you want to support me directly, monetarily, if you like what I'm doing enough to want to fling me a little bit of money every month, then you can do that on Patreon, and it does make a difference. I don't get a lot of money from YouTube ad revenue these days, so I don't think anybody does especially. So even just, $1 on Patreon is worth more than you watching, like, I don't know, a dozen videos or more maybe. So yeah, it really does make a difference, and I really do appreciate it. But it's not necessary, it's just, the thing that keeps the lights on at the end of the day. Wow, that's subtle guilt trip, eh? Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, you can do all the usual things down underneath it. And of course, as always, stay tuned for more.